You're listening to Inner Echo Stories. Please like and subscribe for more interesting stories. You know how sometimes one little thing can wreck your whole day? For David, it was an email. One email that basically erased his whole career in 15 seconds. That Monday morning started like any other. David was wearing his fancy gray suit and the Burberry tie his wife Sarah gave him for his birthday. He gave Sarah a quick kiss on the forehead, grabbed his leather briefcase, and said, "See you tonight. I'll be home early." His voice totally calm. Sarah was busy cleaning up breakfast for their son and Max. "Be careful, honey," she said. But David's Lexus didn't turn onto the usual road to his skyscraper office downtown. It just kept driving and driving, finally stopping in a quiet park on the edge of the city. He turned off the engine and just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel. His face in the rearview mirror looked like a stranger's. His eyes were sunken, his skin pale, under the streetlights that were still on. He opened his phone. There it was, an email from the head of Human Resources sent at 6:05 a.m. Just a few cold, short lines. "Due to a company reorganization, your position is no longer needed. We sincerely thank you." The words danced on the screen, stabbing him in the eyes. His hands started to shake. He put the phone down, tried to take a deep breath, but the air felt thick in his lungs. A cold sweat broke out down his back, soaking through his expensive Egyptian cotton shirt, even though the car's AC was still humming. He got out and walked mechanically toward a stone bench near the pond. For 3 hours, David just sat there. People walked by, joggers ran past, mothers pushed strollers. They all passed him like ghosts. His ears were ringing. All he could hear was the thump, 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 thump of his own heart, getting louder and louder, drowning out even the birds singing. He looked down at his own shiny leather shoes, the shoes that had walked on thick carpets in conference rooms, now covered in dust and grass clippings from the park. A crazy idea popped into his head. He got up, drove to a business district, and walked into a random office building he'd never been to. He went straight to the basement bathroom. Standing there, he could hear the familiar sounds through the foggy glass door. The screech of a printer, the clack-clack of keyboards, the distant murmur of meetings. David leaned against the cold tile wall, closed his eyes, and breathed in that weird mix of printer paper, coffee, and floor cleaner. For one insane moment, standing in a public bathroom, he could pretend he still belonged. He was still David Miller, marketing director. But then his phone rang. Sarah's number. It snapped him back to reality. His voice suddenly got loud and cheerful, way too cheerful. "Hey, hun, I'm in a meeting. I'll be home early. Love you." He hung up and looked at himself in the bathroom mirror. A guy in a suit, lying to his wife in a public restroom. His face burned with shame. And so, the lie began. Every morning, he'd leave the house right on time, the goodbye kiss, the promise to be at home early. But his destination wasn't his fancy office anymore. It was the public library, where he'd hide in a corner for hours, scrolling job websites, terrified someone would recognize him. It was a cheap coffee shop where he'd order a black coffee and hunch over his laptop, pretending to be super busy with reports. He learned how to hide the truth like a criminal hides evidence. But some things were impossible to hide. The pile of bills on the kitchen counter kept growing taller. Sarah started giving him these little sideways glances during dinner, quick like a radar sweep. "Busy week at the office?" she asked gently one night, while still putting food on Max's plate. "Oh, the usual," David said, smiling with his mouth but not his eyes. "Just a new project, a little stressful." "I see," Sarah said, her voice flat. She didn't ask more, but that silence was scarier than a bunch of questions. Then one night at dinner, David's phone rang, an unknown number. His heart hammered, his mouth went dry. "Sorry, gotta take this," he said, jumping up and rushing into the bedroom, closing the door. "Hello, David speaking," he said, forcing his voice to sound professional and calm. "Yes, I'm on top of that project. I'll send the full report by the end of the week." A cheerful woman's voice came through the other end. "Hi there. I'm calling from Sunshine Insurance. We have a special promotion this month." David hung up, his hand shaking. He turned and opened the door. Both Sarah and Max had stopped eating, just looking at him. The worried look in his wife's eyes and the curious, innocent stare from his son. They cut into his crumbling pride like a knife. He sat back down and tried to chew the food in his mouth, but it felt like sawdust, dry and bitter. The next days were a blur of racing against time. He sent out resumes everywhere, from huge companies to tiny startups. Mostly, he just heard nothing back. A few promising interviews led to more silence. The savings account got smaller every day. David started staying up all night, sitting in his small home office, the cold blue light from his laptop screen shining on his tired face. And then it arrived. Late one night, when everyone was asleep, David opened an email. The subject line made his blood run cold. Final notice on mortgage foreclosure proceedings. Deadline, 30 days. The words danced and blurred in front of his eyes. This house, the house they bought when Max was born, with the backyard where Sarah grew roses, with Max's room that had stars painted on the ceiling, wouldn't be theirs anymore. David looked up, his gaze going through the crack in Max's slightly open door. A Pokeball-shaped nightlight gave off a soft glow. Max was sitting on the rug, giggling to himself, carefully arranging his shiny Pokémon cards under the light. He was gently placing each one into a little red tin box. David saw his son's reflection in the black screen of his laptop. A small, happy world, completely separate from the disaster happening outside. And then the thought hit him, not slowly, but like a lightning bolt, cruel and desperate. It flashed in David's mind, clear and horrifyingly cold. The collection? That tin box. The internet says old cards are valuable, really valuable, a lot of money. His heart clenched. He looked at his own hands, the hands that had comforted Max, that had held his little boy's hand crossing the street, now trembling slightly. He looked at Max again. His son was hugging the tin box to his chest, whispering something to the creatures inside, his innocent smile breaking David's heart. David closed his eyes and let out a long, heavy sigh. That breath felt like it carried all the exhaustion, fear, and despair of the last weeks. For the first time in weeks of drifting, he knew what he had to do. A clear, specific, terrible plan. And it would be the decision he would regret for the rest of his life. The attic smelled like old memories and dust. David had to squeeze through the small trapdoor to get up there. It was a tight, dark space, lit only by the weak beam of a flashlight pointing at piles of old stuff covered in tarps. The air was stuffy and blazing hot under the roof tiles, baking in the August sun. His back was instantly soaked with sweat. He knew right where it was. A light brown cardboard box with broken handles, sealed with layers of old tape. Scrawled on the side in faded ink was his own handwriting from his 20s, "Valuables, do not touch." David's heart pounded as he dragged the box toward him. Dust flew everywhere, making him sneeze. He sat right down on the dirty wooden floor and slowly opened the lid. A familiar smell rushed out, the smell of old paper, plastic binder pages, and a faint hint of long-gone bubblegum. Inside wasn't messy like he thought. Everything was neatly arranged, fake leather binders in red, blue, and yellow, lined up perfectly. Next to them were a few unopened booster packs, their plastic seals still intact. David's hands shook as he opened the first binder. The Pokémon cards appeared, still shiny under their plastic sleeves. Each card was a memory. This Pikachu with red cheeks, he traded 3 packs of instant noodles for it with his college dorm roommate. That legendary Blastoise, he woke up at 5 a.m. and stood in line outside a toy store to buy. And then he saw it. In the middle of the binder, carefully wrapped in 2 plastic sleeves, was the Charizard, first edition. The majestic fire dragon, wings spread, mouth blowing bright orange flames. The colors were as vivid as the day he got it. In the top left corner, the small gray first edition stamp was still clear. David held the card up. The light shone through the plastic, making it glitter. His hands shook harder. He remembered the day he got it perfectly. He was just a freshman in college, working at a coffee shop for next to no money. He skipped breakfast for a month and a half, drinking black coffee and eating discount day-old bread to save up for that one lucky booster pack. When he tore it open and saw Charizard, he yelled with joy right in the store, making everyone turn and look. "You kept it in great shape," Sarah had said when he showed her back when they were first dating. "But why don't you sell it? I hear it's worth a lot." "Never," David had replied, his voice full of pride. "This is my memory." Now that memory was in his hand, heavy. It wasn't a joy anymore. It was the last card to play. The lifeline. He carried the box down to his small home office and locked the door. His hands were still dusty from the attic. He sat at the computer, open collecting forums and auction sites. He had to look up the price of each card, each set. The numbers that came up made him dizzy. This collection, if sold piece by piece, could be worth 3 times what he needed to pay the bank for a few months. But selling it all together would be faster. David took his phone and started taking pictures. The camera flash lit up the cards, making them look fake and bright. He typed up a description. Selling original first edition Pokémon collection fast. Excellent condition. Complete set. His finger hovered over the enter key. His throat felt tight. Then he pressed it. In less than 10 minutes, the notifications started popping up. Messages, emails, offers. One person asked for the price of just the cherished. Another wanted to buy the whole starter set. Every little ding of a new message felt like a hammer hitting his chest. "Dad?" The small voice from the door made David jump. He spun around, his hand frantically trying to close the browser tab, but it was too late. Max stood there in his Pikachu pajamas, hair a mess. The little boy looked at the cardboard box on the desk, at the cards laid out, then up at the computer screen, where a picture of the Charizard was still half visible. "What are you doing with my old toy box?" Max asked, his voice innocent. David swallowed. I was just checking on it, buddy. Haven't looked at it in a while." Max walked into the room and over to the desk. He looked at the Charizard in his dad's hand, his eyes wide. "Your Charizard," he whispered like he was looking at a holy treasure. "You told me you skipped breakfast to buy it." "Yeah," David said quietly, his voice raspy. Max was quiet for a long time. His eyes moved from the card to his dad's stressed face, to the computer, and back to the card. A slow, painful understanding dawned in his 10-year-old eyes. Dad, are you going to sell them?" Max asked, his voice so small it was almost a whisper. David couldn't answer. He could only look at his son, feeling like his heart was being squeezed. He opened his mouth to say something, but only weak words came out. I just need some money for a little while." Max, he stood up and knelt down so he was eye level with Max, pulling him into a hug. Max's body was stiff. He didn't hug back. "I promise you," David said, his voice shaking. "Just a few more months. When I get a new job, I'll buy them all back. Even more of them, I promise." Max was quiet for so long, David thought he hadn't heard him. Then the boy gave a small nod, his face looking down. "I understand," Max said, his voice flat, without any feeling. He slowly pulled away from his dad's hug, turned, and walked to the door. At the doorway, Max stopped and looked back one last time at the Charizard on the desk. That look, it wasn't anger, it wasn't sadness, it was a deep disappointment, like a belief had just been shattered. The bedroom door closed softly. That little click sounded louder than a slam. David slumped to the floor, his head in his hands. He wanted to cry, but no tears came. Just a cold, empty feeling spreading through his chest. Dinner that night was heavy with silence. Max just ate without talking, his eyes on his plate. Sarah glanced at her husband, then at her son, her eyes full of questions she didn't ask. David felt like he was sitting on thin ice, about to fall through. Later that night, when the house was asleep, David was back at his computer. The offer to buy just the Charizard was still there, with a price that made his head spin, double the market rate. The buyer's username was Leo the Dragon. The message said, "I need that Charizard. Name your price." David looked at the wall separating his room from Max's. He imagined his son sleeping, probably dreaming about Pokémon. He remembered the promise he made that afternoon, "I'll buy them all back." Then he looked at his bank account balance on another screen. The number was in the red. The final notice from the bank, 27 days left. The pressure came rushing back, powerful and cruel. It smothered the promise, smothered the guilt, smothered the memory of the college kid who went hungry to buy that card. David's hand moved the mouse. The white cursor hovered over the accept offer button. In the quiet room, he could hear his own breathing, fast and shallow. He closed his eyes. Click. The sound of the mouse click was painfully loud in the silent night, like the sound of a lock snapping shut forever. What David didn't know was that the Charizard wasn't just a valuable card. It was the birthday gift he gave Max when the boy turned 7 and was just learning to read. He had put it in his son's hand and said, "This is Charizard, the strongest of them all. I'm giving it to you, so you'll always be strong like him." Ever since then, Max treated it like a lucky charm, carrying it in his pocket to school for every hard test. It was the heart of the whole collection, the invisible thread connecting father and son through that world of make-believe creatures. 2 days later, the money transferred. A big number, enough to pay the bank for 3 months. The old cardboard box was packed up carefully and taken to the post office. David watched the clerk put the shipping label on it, feeling like he was watching a part of his life being sealed up and sent away forever. The house was safe for now. The money pressure eased up a little. Sarah breathed a small sigh of relief, even though she didn't know where the money came from. Max stayed quiet, only occasionally looking at the bookshelf where his red tin card box now sat empty in one corner. But what David had just lost was worth 1,000 times more. Secrets always find a way out, usually at the worst possible time. It was a Tuesday afternoon, drizzling rain. David had just come home from work, which really meant from another day, drifting around coffee shops, sending out resumes, and sitting in his car, listening to interview podcasts. He walked in and called out, "Honey, I'm home." But no one answered. The air in the house felt weird, too quiet. He found Sarah sitting in the small home office, in front of the glowing computer screen. Her back was ramrod straight, hands on her lap. David walked closer, his heart starting to race. On the screen was an open email from the bank, the final notice email he thought he'd deleted, but had apparently just put in the trash and never emptied. "Sarah," he croaked. She turned around. No tears, no anger, just a deep, bone-tired look in her eyes, like she'd just finished a marathon she didn't know she was running. "Just tell me," she said, her voice scarily calm and flat. "Are we about to lose the house?" David opened his mouth to say everything's fine, like he always did. But looking into his wife's eyes, he knew the act was over. All those weeks of lying, the empty promises, the pretend mornings, they all collapsed right then and there. You found the letter," he finally admitted, too tired to fight it. Sarah didn't reply. She stood up, walked out of the room, and went straight to their bedroom. David stood frozen, listening to the sound of a drawer opening, the soft clatter of things being taken out. He walked out into the hall and stood in the open doorway. She was pulling out a suitcase. Not the nice travel one, but the old, beat-up one they'd used when they moved into this house 10 years ago. "Sarah, what are you doing?" David asked, his voice full of panic. "Packing," she said shortly, not looking at him. "I got a job in Springfield. It's a 3-hour drive away. They need a part-time warehouse manager." "Springfield? But the house, Max?" "I talked to Max," Sarah said, still packing. "He understands, and I found us a place. A small apartment. It's cheap." David felt his face flush hot. "Why didn't you talk to me? Why are you deciding everything by yourself?" For the first time that night, Sarah stopped. She turned and looked at him, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "Because you didn't talk to me about anything, David. You let me live a lie for months. You sold our son's things without asking me. I don't even know what part of you to trust anymore." Each word was like a knife. David stood there, gripping the doorframe. He could feel his fingernails digging into the paint, but he didn't feel the pain. Just a numbness, a shame that went all the way to his bones. "I was figuring it out," he tried, his voice weak. "I have money for a few more months." "And then what?" Sarah cut him off. "Then we're just racing the clock again? David, I can't live like this. I'm tired." She turned back to packing. David saw her shoulders shake a little, but she didn't make a sound. That silence hurt more than anything. 2 weeks later, they left the house. It wasn't a happy moving day with a big truck and neighbors waving goodbye. It was a quiet evacuation at night, their SUV packed with just the essentials. Most of their stuff sold off or given away. Their new home wasn't a house. It was a third-floor apartment in a building from the 1970s, on the edge of Springfield. The walls were painted a yellowy beige that was stained in the damp corners. The floorboards were weak and creaked with every step. From the living room window, they could see the flashing sign of a 24-hour laundromat. Max's room was tiny, just big enough for a single bed and a small desk. His window didn't look out on a backyard or a park anymore. It looked straight at the concrete wall of the building next door, just a few feet away. Even during the day, the room was dark and needed the light on. On their first night in the new place, David got home late. He'd gotten a job, if you could call it that, at a used car lot on the other side of town. A sales position, paying 6% less than his old job, with no benefits. The last train back from another interview he'd gone to was delayed. He opened the apartment door close to 11 p.m. It was dark and silent inside. He could only hear the TV from the apartment next door through the thin wall. David took off his shoes and set down his briefcase. The expensive leather one looked completely out of place in the cramped space. He peeked into Max's room. The door was cracked open. The Pokeball nightlight gave off a soft glow, but it seemed older now, dimmer. Max was asleep. He was curled up facing the wall. On his new cheap blanket, a faded Charmander was printed, the stitching uneven. David was about to leave when his eyes caught something on the desk. A piece of white paper, a pencil drawing. David's heart clenched. He stepped quietly into the room and picked up the paper in the nightlight's glow. It was a drawing of a cherished. Not a perfect drawing, but a shaky, scribbled one by a 10-year-old. But it was full of life. The wings spread wide, the fire-tipped tail curling, the mouth blowing orange flames colored in with a crayon. Underneath the drawing, in big, careful, childlike handwriting, it said, "Welcome home, Dad, I love you." David stood there, the paper shaking in his hand. He looked down at Max, asleep, and saw the boy's eyes were slightly puffy and red, like he'd been crying before he fell asleep. But on his face was the peace of a child, the innocent belief that Dad would always make things right. His own promise echoed in his head. "I promise, just a few more months, I'll buy them all back." Now, they weren't even in that house anymore. The real Charizard was long gone. And this kid, instead of being angry or blaming him, had drawn a new Charizard in to welcome his dad home, to this small, sad apartment. David leaned back against the cold wall and slowly slid down to sit on the floor. He held the paper. He looked at it, then at his sleeping son, then at the tiny, empty room. And then the tears started. Not loud sobs, but a quiet, steady stream like rain on a window pane. They rolled down his cheeks and soaked into the collar of his cheap secondhand shirt. He cried for his own lies. He cried for selling his son's lucky charm to save a house, then losing it anyway. He cried for this boy who, instead of demanding what was his, had given his dad a paper gift when he came home from yet another failed day. He sat there for a long time, the sound of the clock ticking from the living room. A distant car horn. Someone laughing from the apartment downstairs. David realized something painful. What he had to protect now wasn't the four walls of their old house, not his job title, not his fancy tie. It was the trusting look in his little boy's eyes, which was slowly fading. It was Sarah's trust, which he had shattered. It was his own family, becoming like strangers under the same, much smaller roof. That welcome home dad drawing was the sweetest, most painful scolding David had ever received, and it marked the start of a new life where everything felt strange and distant. Time in the old apartment building passed in a weird way, both slow and rushed at the same time. David got used to the new rhythm, the alarm buzzing at 4:15 a.m. in the cold dark of the cramped bedroom. He was out the door by 5, wearing cheap work boots instead of shiny leather shoes. The job at the used car lot was a whole different world. The smell of gasoline, motor oil, and cheap car cleaner all mixed into a smell that clung to his clothes and skin. He'd get home around 9 p.m., sometimes later if there was a last-minute customer. His body ached, his back sore from standing all day. When he walked into the apartment, usually only the kitchen light was on. Sarah would often be reading a book or watching TV with the sound low. Sometimes there'd be a plate of reheated food on the table for him. As for Max, David didn't really know what Max was doing anymore. The boy seemed to have built his own schedule, his own world in that small room. Max's door was usually closed, only open a crack. From outside, David could hear the click-clack of a keyboard, the tap of a mouse, sometimes muffled voices from headphones. One Friday evening, David got home a little earlier than usual. He saw Sarah setting the table for 3. Spaghetti, Max's favorite. "Max, come eat with us," Sarah called toward the bedroom. A moment of silence. Then a small voice came back. "I'm not hungry. You guys go ahead." Sarah sighed, looking at David. "He's said that all week. Only eats in his room." David walked over to Max's door. He raised his hand, his finger curled to knock. But he stopped. He could still hear the rapid keyboard tapping inside, the frantic clicking. A strange feeling came over him. He felt like an intruder, a stranger trying to break into private territory. He lowered his hand and went back to the table. "Just let him be," he said, his voice tired. Dinner was quiet, just the sound of forks on plates. David tried to talk a little about work, about a car he'd sold, but Sarah just nodded, her eyes on her plate. A few days later, David decided to try again. He waited until Max came out to use the bathroom and stopped him in the hall. "So, who do you play Pokémon with these days?" David asked, trying to sound light and casual. Max stopped, not looking directly at his dad. He was wearing a big t-shirt with a video game character David didn't recognize. "I don't play anymore," Max said, his voice flat. "You don't, but you loved it." "I'm older now," Max interrupted, still not looking up. "Pokémon is for little kids." Then he hurried back to his room. The door closed. The little click of the lock sounded small but sharp in the quiet apartment. David stood there, still holding the glass of water he'd been about to drink. The words, "Pokémon is for little kids," echoed in his head. He remembered the first night in the apartment, the scribbled Charizard drawing, the I love you. That was only weeks ago. This change was too fast, too sudden. David started noticing small details. No more Pokémon books on the shelf, no more Pikachu or Charmander t-shirts, no more giggling from Max watching card videos on YouTube. Instead, there was just the long silence behind the closed door, broken only by keyboard and mouse sounds. A scary thought began to grow in David's mind. Was his son getting addicted to video games? All those news stories about kids spending hours in front of screens, skipping school, pulling away from family. They flashed in his mind, mixed with the image of Max getting thinner, with dark circles under his eyes from lack of sleep. Then one night, that worry turned into real fear. David woke up around 2 a.m. thirsty. He walked out of the bedroom toward the kitchen. As he passed Max's room, he heard whispering. The boy was still awake. David stopped to listen. Max's voice was low, but in the dead quiet, he could catch pieces. Yeah, I know, but my card collection, but it's gone. A pause. David held his breath, his ear almost against the door. I know what it was worth, a first edition Charizard. My dad had one. Max's voice was full of regret and a deep sadness that didn't belong to a 10-year-old. But it's over. I'm not into that anymore. I'm focusing on something else now. Another pause. David could hear a soft sigh from inside. Yeah, I'll show you tomorrow. Gotta sleep now. I should sleep too. A small sound, maybe hanging up or turning off a mic, then silence. David stood rooted in the hallway, still holding the empty glass. The words echoed, something else, focusing on something else. I'll show you. No. A father's fear rose up, strong and cruel. What's something else? Online gaming, gambling, dark websites, talking to strangers online. David had read articles about kids being tricked, bullied online, pulled into dangerous things. His heart pounded. He went back to the bedroom, lay down, but stared wide-eyed at the dark ceiling. For the rest of the night, he couldn't sleep. The next morning, David decided he had to do something. He waited until Sarah got home from her part-time job around noon. Sarah, we need to talk about Max, he began, his voice serious. Sarah was taking off her shoes and looked up at him. What's wrong? I think something's not right. He spends way too much time in his room. I heard him talking to someone in the middle of the night. He said he's focusing on something else. Sarah sighed and sat down on the old couch. Here we go again. Max is just a kid adjusting to a new life. Adjusting by locking himself in his room all day, by refusing to eat with his family. David's voice started to rise. Do you know how he's doing at school? Is he being bullied? Is something wrong? Don't put this on him. Sarah stood up, her voice rising too. Do you even know why he doesn't want to come out? Why he doesn't want to talk about Pokémon anymore? Can't you see? Then tell me, what do you know that you're not saying? Because he's ashamed, David, Sarah yelled, her eyes flashing. He's ashamed he doesn't have his collection anymore. Kids at school ask, and he doesn't know what to say. He told me he feels empty, like he lost a part of himself. David took a step back as if punched, but his fear and helplessness were turning into anger. So what's this something else? Why is he talking at midnight? Are you sure he's not into something dangerous? You always look for problems with him instead of looking at yourself. Sarah turned her back, her shoulders shaking. David felt everything spiraling out of control. The worry, the guilt, the helplessness, all mixed into a dark, messy feeling. He needed to know the truth. He needed to prove he was still the father, still in control. Fine, David said, his voice cold and determined. I'll see for myself. I'll check his computer. I have to know what he's doing. Sarah turned around, her eyes wide. You will not. That's his privacy. If he's not doing anything wrong, he has nothing to fear, David said, his voice firm even though his heart was racing. I'm his father. I have a right to know. Sarah shook her head, looking at him with utter disappointment. You're really going to do this? After everything? David didn't answer. He turned away, walked into their room, and closed the door. In his mind, the plan was already forming. Tomorrow morning, when Max was at school, when Sarah was at work, he would go into his son's room. He would turn on the computer. He would find out the truth. David's investigation was planned. He had no idea that what he was about to discover wouldn't be his son's guilt, but a judgment on himself. All right, so things are getting really emotional. We left off with David planning to sneak into his son's room and check his computer. He thinks Max is up to something bad. But what he finds is something completely different. The clock on the microwave flipped to 8:15 a.m. The front door clicked shut. Sarah had left for work. Max had left for school at 7:30. The apartment was eerily quiet. David stood outside Max's door, holding a cup of cold coffee. The cup trembled slightly in his hand, spilling a few dark drops on the floor. He'd called in sick that morning, blaming a headache. The truth was he couldn't focus on anything but the computer in his son's room. Part of him felt horrible, invading his son's privacy. But a bigger part was just plain scared, terrified of what he might find. The image of Max getting thinner with dark circles under his eyes, pulling away, it all painted a scary story in his head. He set the coffee cup down on the table and took a deep breath. He grabbed the doorknob. It turned easily. It wasn't locked. The door swung open. The small room was surprisingly neat. The bed was made. School books were stacked neatly on the desk. And the black laptop, closed, sat right in the middle. David stepped inside, feeling like he was stepping into forbidden territory. The air smelled like Max, a mix of kids' soap and new paper. He sat down in the cheap plastic chair and opened the laptop. The screen lit up, asking for a password. David's heart thumped. He tried Max's birthday. No. Sarah's birthday. No. Then an idea flashed. He typed in his and Sarah's wedding anniversary. The screen unlocked. It was like a punch to the gut. His 10-year-old son had used his parents' most important day as his password. A naive, heartbreaking security mistake. David looked at the desktop. The wallpaper was an old picture of the three of them in front of their old house on a sunny day. Max was grinning, holding a Pokémon card high in the air, the Charizard. David recognized it was from Max's 7th birthday. He swallowed, his shaky hand picking up the mouse. He opened the web browser and clicked on the browsing history. Chrome browser history is cleared, a notice popped up. David let out a breath, feeling both disappointed and relieved. But then he saw the bookmarks bar, a list of saved websites. He clicked. Canva for kids. Fiverr Junior, freelance for teens. Simple logo design guide for beginners. Pixel art editor online. Free photo editing. PayPal for kids. Family account. Pokemon card market prices updated 2024. David's heart started racing wildly. His hands began to sweat, making the mouse slippery. What was his son doing with this stuff? Fiverr Junior? PayPal for kids? Was he being taken advantage of? Was there some scheme tricking kids into working online? The fear came flooding back, stronger. He opened the email app. It also asked for a login. He tried the wedding anniversary password again. And it worked. The inbox opened, David's eyes widened. Dozens of emails, not from friends, not from school, but from email addresses with names like Tommy Soccer Coach, Lily Art Club, Jake the Skater, Emma from Canada. David's hand trembled. He clicked the first email from Tommy Soccer Coach. Hey Max, the logo you drew for my soccer team is awesome. The whole team loves it. I sent the $10 to your PayPal like we agreed. Thanks a bunch. Tommy. He clicked the next one from Lily Art Club. Dear Max, thank you for editing the poster for my art club. The colors look way better. I sent an extra $5 as a tip. Hope to work with you again. Lily. A third, a fourth, a fifth email. All similar. Thank you notes. Compliments, small payments, $5, $10, $15. David scrolled down. An email from PayPal itself. Transaction confirmed, transfer to Max Miller's child savings account. Current balance, $1,500. $247. A 10-year-old earning money by drawing logos, editing pictures. David felt dizzy. He didn't understand. This wasn't dark websites, violent games, or gambling. This was work. Small, honest jobs. Then his eyes stopped on another email. A draft email, never sent. The subject line, goal. David's heart seemed to stop. He clicked it. There was no recipient, just a few lines like a note to himself. On goal, $500. And to buy back the Charizard for Dad. Dad promised me that I'll buy them all back. But I'll buy it back for him. To make Dad happy. And below those words was a saved link. David clicked it. It led to an online auction page. On it, a familiar picture. The first edition Charizard. The exact card he had sold. Current price, $475. Time left, 3 days. David sat completely still in front of the screen. Everything in his mind collapsed. The guesses, the fears, the accusations he'd made against his son, they all vanished, revealing a simple, pure, and utterly heartbreaking truth. His son wasn't addicted to games. He wasn't mad at his dad for selling the collection. He wasn't hiding in his room out of anger or depression. He was working. He was learning how to design, how to edit pictures. He was taking small orders from other kids all over the world. He was earning money, $5, $10 at a time. All to do what? To buy back the Charizard for his dad. To keep the promise for his dad. To make Dad happy. Those 3 words danced on the screen, turning into needles that stabbed David's eyes. He remembered his own promise. I promise, just a few more months, I'll buy them all back. An empty promise, born from despair and guilt. He'd said it and forgotten it, but his 10-year-old son had remembered, and the boy was trying to make it real. David looked at the $247.18 in the savings account, then at the $475 price for the Charizard. The boy was still more than halfway short, with only 3 days left. A 10-year-old boy was trying to save an adult's broken promise. The computer screen started to blur in front of David. He didn't know if it was from tears or shock. He could hear motorcycle engines from the street, someone talking on the phone in the next apartment, water running in the old pipes in the wall. But it all sounded very far away, very muffled. Only the words "to make Dad happy" were clear, aching, and constant in his mind. David had just discovered the biggest secret of his life, and also the clearest proof of his failure as a father. He had sold his son's treasure to save the house, then lost the house anyway. And his son, instead of demanding justice, was quietly working to buy that treasure back. For him. To make Dad happy. He sat there in front of his son's computer in the tiny room and felt smaller than he ever had. You're listening to Inner Echo Stories. Please like and subscribe for more interesting stories. Sometimes the confession comes from the person who isn't guilty at all. David sat at the kitchen table all that afternoon. Max's laptop was in front of him, still open to the draft email with the words, "To make Dad happy." He didn't touch it anymore. He just stared, and as if the words might change, disappear, or reveal a different meaning. But they were still there, clear, simple, and painfully true. The sound of a key in the front door lock came at 3:30 p.m. Max was home from school. David heard the backpack hit the floor, shoes being kicked off. Then the boy walked into the living room and stopped when he saw his dad at the table. "Dad?" Max called, sounding surprised. "You're home early?" David looked up. He saw Max standing there in his school uniform, a faded blue polo and khakis. The boy was thinner, just like Sarah said. His big clear eyes looked at David with curiosity. "I took the afternoon off," David said, his voice raspy. Come sit with me for a minute." Max hesitated, then walked over and sat in the chair across from him. The boy's eyes flicked to the laptop, recognizing it as his own. His face changed from curious to worried, then to a strange calm. David turned the laptop toward his son. His trembling finger pointed at the screen. "Explain this to me," he said, his voice choking up. What is this for?" Max was quiet for a moment. He didn't cry, didn't get angry, didn't get defensive. He just looked at the screen, then up at his dad with a scary maturity for a 10-year-old. "I looked it up online," Max said, his voice even and calm. "A first edition Charizard like yours sells for a lot. I saw one online for $465. I figured if I could save up $500, I could buy it back. Or at least a different one." David felt his throat tighten. "But why? Why would you do that?" Max looked down at the table, his small fingers scratching at a scratch in the wood. "I wanted you to be less sad," he said quietly. "Because you promised me. You said you'd buy them all back. I could see you were really sad. I thought, if I could buy back the Charizard, you'd be happy." Each word was a hammer blow to David's chest. His promise, the empty promise born from guilt and despair, his 10-year-old had remembered it. Not as a promise to be kept, but as a mission to be completed. A gift to be given back. "I could see you were really sad." That sentence, simple, honest, and it exposed all of David's failure as a father, as a husband. He thought he'd hidden the pain, the worry. He thought he'd acted the part of the strong man, even while falling apart inside. But his 10-year-old son had seen right through it, had seen the sadness in his dad's eyes and decided to do something about it. Tears began to roll down David's cheeks. Not loud sobs, just a quiet, steady stream. At that moment, the bedroom door opened. Sarah stepped out. Her eyes were also red, like she'd been crying alone in the room. She walked over and put a hand on Max's shoulder. "I told you not to keep it from your dad," Sarah said softly, her voice also thick with emotion. Max looked down. "I'm sorry, but I wanted it to be a surprise for Dad." David looked up at his wife, his vision blurred by tears. You knew about this?" "For about a month," Sarah said, sitting down next to Max. "I saw him on the computer late at night, and I was worried at first too. But then I found out he wasn't playing games, he was learning design online. He even asked me how to use PayPal." She looked at David, her eyes full of love and a little bit of blame. "I was going to tell you, but I saw you were shutting everyone out. You thought you had to carry everything alone." Sarah took her phone out of her pocket and opened the banking app. She showed it to David, a joint savings account named Sarah and Max. The balance, worth 5 buys. This is from the two of us, Sarah said, her voice shaking. I tutor English online in the evenings after you're asleep. I make about $80 a week. Max makes money from his little jobs. We've been saving together. David looked at the number on the phone screen, then back at the laptop with Max's $247. Almost $560 total. Enough to buy the Charizard and have some left over. A bitter truth hit him, completely knocking him down. While he had been trying to tough it out alone, thinking it was his responsibility and his pride as the man, his family hadn't been sitting still. They weren't waiting for him to save them. They had become the strongest support system, quietly working, saving, building things back up bit by bit. He wasn't alone. He had just isolated himself. David stood up. His legs were shaky, but he walked around the table to his wife and son. He didn't say anything, just opened his arms. Sarah stood up and stepped into his arms first. Then she pulled Max in. The boy was stiff at first, surprised, but then he let his dad hug him too. And so they stood there in the small kitchen of the cramped apartment, the three of them holding each other. David felt his shoulder get wet. Sarah's tears. Then he felt a small trembling from Max's body and knew the boy was crying too. David held them tight, sobbing like a child. Hiccups and cries broke out from deep in his chest, ones he'd been holding back for months. They came out powerful and uncontrollable. He cried from shame, from regret, from gratitude, from the love he had almost lost. I'm sorry, he whispered into Sarah's hair, his voice broken by sobs. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry, Max. I was wrong. I didn't trust you guys. I sold your memory. Max pulled his head out of his dad's hug, his face wet with tears. He looked at his dad, his eyes red but still clear. It's okay, Dad, he said, his voice also choked up. I know you did it for us. For an unbelievable forgiveness from a 10-year-old boy. Then Max added, his voice small but clear. But can you help me find the Charizard again? I miss it. It was my birthday present from you when I turned 7. David nodded, unable to speak. He hugged his son again, kissing the top of his head. I promise, he said, his voice full of tears but firm. I'll find it. I'll find the Charizard for you. Holding each other that night, surrounded by the smell of tears and the warmth of family, David knew what he had to do. His biggest mistake wasn't losing his job, losing the house, or selling the collection. It was losing the trust, losing the connection, losing the belief that family is where you can be weak without being judged. And he would fix it. Not with money, not with a new job, not with a bigger house, but by finding that Charizard card, the symbol of the promise he'd broken, and by rebuilding the real home from this very love and trust. So David and Max went on a little road trip. Remember, David found out his son was trying to secretly earn money to buy back the Charizard card for him. Well, now David decided to be the one to try and get it back. Trying to find something you lost starts with looking at the person who took it in the mirror, and that person was David. The morning after the big emotional scene, David woke up with a new feeling. Hard, cold determination. It wasn't an excited, energetic kind of determination. It was quiet and solid, like a rock at the bottom of a river after the flood has passed. I'm going to find it, he told Sarah in the kitchen, holding a cup of coffee he didn't drink, no matter what it takes. Sarah looked at him, her eyes still a little puffy, but softer. But what if you can't? We're okay, David. We have each other. No, David shook his head, his voice quiet but firm. This isn't about the card anymore. It's about a promise, and I've broken too many promises already. Max walked out of his room and overheard. He came over and took his dad's hand. Dad, it's okay if you can't, he said, his voice innocent but heartbreakingly sincere. I have you, that's enough. David bent down and hugged him. But I want you to have both, he whispered into his son's ear. Me and your Charizard. The journey started with the simplest thing, digging through old emails. David opened his trash folder, searching for keywords like Charizard, auction, Leo the Dragon. He found the old transaction confirmation, but besides the nickname and an email address, there was nothing else. No real name, no phone number, no address. Nickname Leo the Dragon. A weird name. Leo is a lion, dragon is a dragon. A made-up creature. David started searching online. He went to card-collecting forums, Facebook groups, Pokémon subreddits. He typed Leo the Dragon into the search bar on every platform. For 2 days, nothing. Just unrelated accounts, people with the same name, but not the right one. On the third night, David sat at the computer at 2 a.m. His eyes were red and tired from lack of sleep. but they had a determined glint. He tried looking on Instagram, a platform he rarely used. And there he found it, a private account with only 127 followers. The display name, Leo, Dragon Keeper. The profile picture was a drawing of a Komodo dragon, not a mythical one. The bio said, 16 Komodo Dragon Conservation, Toy Collector, supporting at Komodo Conserve. David clicked follow and sent a direct message. Hello, I found you through the nickname Leo the Dragon. I'm David, the person who sold you the first edition Charizard a few months ago. I really need to speak with you. Can we talk? The message was sent, but it showed as not seen. David sat there staring at the screen, hoping it would switch to seen right away, but it didn't. A day passed, 2 days. The message was still on not seen. David started to think it was an abandoned account, or the user never checked their messages. While he waited, he did something he hadn't done in a long time. He wrote. Not a marketing report, not a work email, but a letter. He opened a new blank document. The cursor blinked on the white page. David took a deep breath and started typing. Dear Leo, or your real name. First, sorry to bother you. I'm David, the person who sold you the first edition Charizard card last month. I'm not writing to complain or to try to buy it back cheaply. I'm writing to tell you a story. He stopped, looking at those first lines, then he continued. He told about his younger self, about chasing that card, about skipping breakfast, about the joy of finding it. He told about giving it to Max on his 7th birthday, about the light in his son's eyes. Then he told about his own failure, about losing his job, about the lies of this, about the desperation that led him to sell the collection. He didn't make excuses. He just told the truth, exposing his own weakness and mistake. I promised my son I would buy them all back. An empty promise, born from guilt. But my 10-year-old son believed it. And instead of blaming me, he quietly learned design online, took small jobs, earned money $5, $10 at a time. All to buy back the Charizard for me, to make Dad happy. That's what he said. David stopped, his eyes blurring. He wiped them and kept typing. I'm not asking you to sell it back for the old price, or for any price. I know it legally belongs to you. I'm only asking for a chance to fix my mistake and to keep my promise to my son. I'm ready to pay any price I can afford right now. I'm ready to do anything you ask. Work, help, anything. He read the whole letter. It was almost 1,000 words long, full of emotion, full of weakness, full of truths he'd hidden from the world. Part of him wanted to delete it and write a more professional, less emotional letter. But then he thought of Max, of the trusting look in his son's eyes, of the words, to make Dad happy. He copied the whole thing. He found Leo the Dragon's email address from the old transaction, and he pasted it into a new email. His finger hovered over the send key. His heart was pounding. This was the first letter in his life that wasn't calculated, wasn't strategic, wasn't trying to impress. It was just the truth. He pressed it. The little whoosh sound as the email sent. David sat there looking at the screen. He felt empty, but also relieved. He had done his part. He had been honest. He wasn't hiding anymore. 3 days of silence. David still went to his job at the car lot, but his mind was elsewhere. Every time his phone buzzed with an email, his heart jumped. Every time he opened his inbox, he hoped to see Leo the Dragon's name. But it was all spam, ads, notifications from work. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, just as David got home, his phone buzzed. A new email. The subject line, about your Charizard. Sender, Leo. The dragon. David froze right there in the narrow hallway. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. His hand shook as he opened the email. The message was short and straight to the point. David, I read your letter. I won't sell the card, but I can let you borrow it. Meet me at this address on Sunday, 2 p.m. The Dragon's Nest Cafe, 123 Maple Street, Rivertown. Bring your son. Leo. David read the email over and over, just 4 sentences. Won't sell. Can let you borrow. Meet up. Bring your son. Let you borrow? Why borrow? And why meet in person? Why bring Max? A whirlwind of questions spun in his head. Who was Leo the Dragon, really? Some tough collector playing with him? Some rich collector wanting to show off? A genuinely good person wanting to help? Or a trap? A scam? David looked at the end of the email. Rivertown was 20 kilometers away, a town even smaller than Springfield. The Dragon's Nest Cafe, the name fit the nickname. He opened Google Maps and searched the address. An image came up. A small, cozy-looking bookstore cafe with a humble storefront and a sign with a blue dragon curled around a coffee cup. Dad, what's wrong? Max stepped out of his room, seeing his dad standing like a statue in the hallway. David turned and looked at him. He bent down and showed him the phone. I got in touch with the person who bought the Charizard, he said, his voice full of emotion. They want to meet us. Max took the phone and read the email. His eyes lit up. They'll let us borrow it? Really? I don't know, David admitted, but we're going, this Sunday. Max looked up at his dad, his face full of a hope David hadn't seen in a long time. So I'll get to see Charizard again? Maybe, buddy, David said, hugging him. Maybe. But in his heart, the question still swirled. Who was Leo the Dragon? A 16-year-old like the Instagram bio said? Why would a teenager have so much money to buy such an expensive card? And most importantly, what did borrow mean? This Sunday, everything would be revealed. And David, with a heart full of doubt, but also a tiny, flickering hope, knew this could be the first real step on his journey to make things right, or a disappointment even more painful than before. Sometimes your saving grace comes in the form of a 16-year-old kid with thick glasses. That Sunday, the sky over Rivertown was a clear blue with fluffy white clouds. David drove with Max in the passenger seat. The boy was wearing his best clothes, a clean polo and new jeans he got on sale. His hands were clenched tight, his fingernails digging into his palms from nervousness. Do you really think they'll let us borrow it, Dad? Max asked for the third time on the trip. I don't know, buddy, David answered honestly. But whatever happens, I'm just really glad you're here with me. They parked in front of the Dragon's Nest Cafe at 1:50 p.m. The cafe was even smaller than in the picture. A cozy space with a big glass window, bookshelves inside, and a few small wooden tables. The blue dragon on the sign looked friendly, not scary. David took a deep breath. Okay, let's go in. They stepped inside. The warm smell of fresh coffee and baked pastries hit them. The cafe was quiet, with only a few people reading in a far corner. David looked around, searching for a middle-aged man, the image he'd imagined of a serious collector. A man with salt and pepper hair reading a newspaper? No. A smart-looking young man? No. Then he saw an arm wave slightly from a table by the window. Sitting there was a teenager. An actual kid, looking no older than 16 or 17. Skinny, wearing thick black-framed glasses and a t-shirt with a picture of a Komodo dragon and the words, "Save the Dragons." On the table in front of him was a thick biology textbook, a green smoothie, and a clear plastic case. Inside the case, David could see Pokémon cards neatly arranged. David's heart sank. A wave of disappointment hit him, quick and heavy, like a deflating balloon. A kid? Leo. The dragon, who paid double the market price for the Charizard, was just a teenager? Max noticed too, squeezing his dad's hand tighter. Dad, is that him? Max whispered. David nodded, leading his son to the table. He tried to keep his face neutral, but inside that all his hope seemed to vanish. How could he convince a kid to give up a valuable toy? How could he explain the complicated mess of adult failure and regret to a teenager? They reached the table. The teenager stood up and gave a small smile. He was taller than David expected, but still had the look of a high school student. Hi, he said, his voice deeper than his appearance suggested. You're David, right? I'm Leo. David shook his hand, still confused. Hi, you're Leo? Leo the dragon? The boy nodded, his wider smile showing braces. Yeah, that's me. Please, sit down. And this is Max, right? Hi. Max nodded shyly and sat next to his dad, his eyes glued to the plastic case on the table. David sat down, feeling awkward. Your name is Leo. No. My name is Leonardo, but everyone calls me Leo, he explained. I like dragons. All kinds, mythical ones, movie ones, and real ones, like Komodo dragons, too. A server came over. David ordered 2 orange juices for him and Max. When the server left, it was quiet again. Just the soft jazz music playing in the cafe. David looked at Leo, then at the case. He could clearly see the Charizard card on top, still in its protective sleeve. His heart thumped. I read your letter, Leo said, breaking the silence. Your story and Max's... It really moved me. David nodded, his throat dry. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I know this is a strange request. It's not strange, Leo interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. I get it. He opened the case and carefully took out the Charizard. He didn't hand it to David or Max right away, but just held it, looking at it in the light from the window. I bought this card with all the birthday money my grandpa left me, Leo said, his voice growing softer. My grandpa passed away last year from cancer. Before he died, he gave me an envelope. Inside was $500 cash and a note. For my favorite grandson. Buy yourself something that makes you think of me. David listened quietly. Max did too, his eyes wide. My grandpa was the first person who taught me how to play Pokémon. Leo continued, his finger gently tracing the card's protective sleeve. He wasn't a collector himself. He'd just buy me booster packs, and we'd sit together while I opened them. He didn't understand the game much, but he loved hearing me explain each creature, each card. He said, "Every card has a story, Leo, and the story is more important than its price." Leo looked up at David. "When I saw this Charizard listed, I recognized it right away. It looked just like the one my grandpa gave me for my 8th birthday, but I lost it when we moved. I thought if I could buy this one, it would be like getting a piece of my memory of him back." He placed the card down on the table between them. "Then I read your letter," Leo said, his voice full of emotion. "And I realized this card already has a different story now. A story about a father and a son. About a promise, about love." David felt his eyes grow hot. He looked at Max and saw tears already rolling down his son's cheeks. Max didn't say anything, just looked at the card like he was seeing an old friend. "I thought about it a lot," Leo said, "and I decided." He pushed the card toward David and Max. "I'm not selling it, and I'm not lending it." David's heart pounded. Here it was, the rejection. He knew it was coming. "I'm giving it back to you and Max," Leo said, his voice clear and firm. David was stunned. He looked at the card, then up at the serious face of the 16-year-old. No, I can't accept this. This is your memory with your grandpa, and I'll pay for it. I have money." Leo shook his head, a gentle smile on his lips. "Money can't buy memories, Mr. David. And this card's true story isn't about my grandpa and me anymore. It's about you and Max. About the promise." David was still shaking his head. "I can't." "You can," Leo said with the voice of someone much older. "And there's only one condition." He looked us David straight in the eyes. "You have to promise me that you'll play Pokémon with Max at least once a week. No phone, no work, no worrying about money or the future. Just you two sit on the floor, open a few new packs, or just look through the collection. Talk about the Pokémon, about school, about anything." Leo paused and took a breath. "My grandpa used to do that with me every Friday night, and those are my best memories. He taught me that the real value of these toys isn't in how rare they are or how much they cost. It's in the moments together they create." Silence. David looked at Leo, then at Max. His son was looking at him, his eyes full of hope and a strange, deep understanding. I promise," David said, his voice choked up. "I promise you." Then he turned to Max. "And I promise you, every Friday night, just us." Max nodded, tears flowing again. He reached out a hand but didn't touch the card right away. He looked at Leo. "Thank you," he said, his voice small but clear. Leo smiled and nodded. "You're welcome. Take good care of it, and make lots of good memories with it." David picked up the card. The plastic sleeve was still cool, but inside the image of Charizard was as vibrant as ever. He felt a warmth spread from his palm up his arm, into his chest, into his heart. He looked at Leo, the 16-year-old with thick glasses, a Komodo dragon t-shirt, and a heart bigger than any adult he'd ever met. In David's eyes, Leo wasn't just a kid anymore. He was a second grandpa, a teacher, a friend who had taught him the deepest lesson about the real value of toys, of memories, and of family love. I don't know how to thank you," David said, his voice thick with emotion. Leo just smiled and took a sip of his smoothie. "Just keep your promise, Mr. David, that's all I want." David nodded, hugging Max close, still holding the Charizard tight. In that moment, in the little cafe called the Dragon's Nest, he felt he had found something even more precious than the card. He had found hope. And more importantly, he had learned that sometimes the people who give the most are the youngest ones, because they still believe in the power of stories, of promises, and of unconditional love. All right, get ready for a happy ending. Last time we left off with David and Max meeting Leo, the amazing teenager who gave them back the Charizard. So, what happens next? Sometimes kindness comes in such an ordinary package that you can hardly believe it's real. David just sat there, the Charizard in his hand, looking at Leo like he was seeing something unbelievable. A 16-year-old kid, with thick glasses and a Komodo dragon t-shirt, had just given him back an item worth hundreds of dollars, asking for nothing but a promise. "Are you really sure?" David repeated, his voice still full of wonder. "You don't need the money. This is your memory with your grandpa." Leo smiled, his eyes behind the thick glasses warm and bright. "You keep it. And here," he said, bending down to get a small brown envelope from his backpack. "I have a few of these too. I think Max will like them." David took the envelope and opened it. Inside were 5 more Pokémon cards, each carefully sleeved in soft plastic. He recognized them right away. They were cards Max had once told him he dreamed of having. A reprint Blastoise, a holographic Mewtwo, a Gyarados with a special foil, and 2 rare Eevee evolutions. How did you know? David trailed off. Leo looked down, a little shy. I checked out Max's public profile on a collecting forum. He posted a dream card list a few months ago. I stumbled on it when I was looking into you after I got your letter. David looked at the cards, then at Leo. A wave of emotion choked him up. This kid hadn't just given back the Charizard. He'd taken the time to learn, to prepare, to make the gift even more meaningful. I can't accept more, David said, his voice trembling. This is too much. They're not worth nearly as much as the Charizard, Leo said quickly. They're just a few cards. But I thought they'd be a good start for Max's new collection. David noticed a detail then. Leo called Max An Max, or Brother Max in Vietnamese, a term of respect, even though he was 6 years older than Max. A small but meaningful sign of respect. He put the Charizard and the envelope down, reached across the table, and firmly shook Leo's hand. The teenager's hand was a little cold, with small calluses on his thumb and forefinger, probably from drawing or writing a lot. Thank you, David said, his eyes brimming. I don't know what else to say. Leo just nodded and smiled. Don't thank me. Thank my grandpa. He was the one who taught me that money is just a tool. Using it to make someone else happy is the real point. David still tried to offer the money, the $300 he and Sarah had saved, plus the $247 from Max's account. But Leo firmly refused. The money my grandpa left was for me to learn how to value and to share, Leo said seriously. If I take your money, it's just a transaction. This way, it's a gift, a story. And I think my grandpa, wherever he is, would be really happy to see his money used like this. David finally gave up. He put the money back in his pocket, feeling very small compared to this teenager's generosity and wisdom. They talked for almost another hour. Leo talked about the Komodo dragon conservation project he was part of, about his dream to be a biologist. David talked about his new job at the car lot, about the bitter lessons he'd learned. 2 generations, 2 different life stories, but with a strange understanding between them. When they said goodbye, Leo gave David a handmade business card, just a small piece of paper with a Komodo dragon and his email address. If you or Max ever want to talk about Pokémon or just talk, feel free to contact me. David hugged Leo, a tight, emotional hug. I'll never forget you, he said sincerely. Me neither, Leo replied, hugging him back. Take good care of Max. On the drive back, David didn't go straight home. His heart was filled with a strange mix of feelings. Gratitude, wonder, warmth. He stopped at a big toy store in a nearby mall. Walking into the store, the smell of new plastic and printed paper hit him. David went straight to the Pokémon aisle. In front of him were shiny booster packs, starter kits, colorful collector's binders. He stood there for a moment, touching the packs. He remembered years ago, as a student, standing before a similar display with the little money he had, thinking hard before buying a single pack. But this time was different. David took out his wallet. He had the $300 from him and Sarah and the $27 from Max's account, money the boy had earned with his own hard work. He wouldn't use it all, but he would use some. He chose 2 of the newest starter kits, one for Max and one for himself. He chose 5 booster packs. And he chose the nicest collector's album with a hardcover, easy flip pages, and plastic slots to protect the cards. Total $85. Not a small amount in their current situation, but David knew this wasn't a waste. It was an investment in memories, in the future, in the relationship between father and son. When he checked out, the cashier, a young woman with blue hair, looked at what David was buying, then at him. For your son? She asked, smiling. David nodded, and for me too. The girl smiled wider. That's awesome. Hope you two have a great time. David took the bag, feeling a simple, pure joy he hadn't felt in a long time. He wasn't buying these things to replace the past or erase his mistakes. It was to start again, to build new memories on the foundation of old lessons. On the way home, he stopped at an office supply store and bought a small cardboard box, the same size and color as the one he'd sold from the old attic. And he bought a small green greeting card with a picture of a Charmander. Getting home around 5 p.m., David heard voices from the kitchen. Sarah and Max were talking about dinner. Max's voice sounded happier, probably from the excitement of the morning's meeting. David didn't go into the kitchen right away. He took the bag and the little box into his room and closed the door. He sat on the bed and slowly arranged the gifts. First was the Charizard. He placed it in a slot in the new album on the middle page. Then the 5 cards from Leo. He placed them on surrounding pages. Finally, the new booster packs. He put them next to the box. He took out the green card and wrote on it in his neatest handwriting, "And for Max, from Dad, who finally kept his promise." A little late. "Now let's open these packs together. Love you." He taped the card to the lid of the cardboard box. Then he carefully placed the album, the packs, and the 2 starter kits inside. The box wasn't full. There was plenty of room for new cards, for new memories to come. David picked up the box and walked out of his room. His heart was racing with a happy nervousness he hadn't felt since getting his first job after college. He walked into Max's room. The small room was tidy. On the desk was still that scribbled Charizard drawing from their first night in the apartment. David placed the small cardboard box right in the middle of the desk, under the drawing. He stood there for a moment, looking at the box. Then he turned and walked out into the hall, but didn't go to his room. He stood just behind Max's slightly open door, his heart thumping. He heard footsteps from the kitchen. Max said something to his mom, then light footsteps came toward the room. David held his breath. The door opened wider. Max walked into the room. David could see his son's back through the crack in the door. A moment of silence. Then David heard a small, sharp intake of breath. Max had seen the box. Light footsteps approached the desk. A small sound. A finger touching the cardboard. Then the sound of the box being opened. Not loud, but gently, slowly, as if afraid to break whatever was inside. And then came silence. Not the silence of disappointment or confusion, but a silence full of choked up, dense emotion. David could picture it. Max standing there, looking into the box, seeing the Charizard in the open album, seeing the other cards, the new packs, and the card with his dad's note. David, hidden behind the door, gripped the door frame. He heard a small sob, very small, but clear in the quiet space. Then a small voice, trembling, full of tears. "Dad!" The emotional moment was about to happen. And David knew this wasn't just Max's moment, but the start of something new for him. A father who had learned that sometimes the greatest gift isn't what you find, but what you give away and get back tenfold. There are moments in life that don't need words because your heart is already shouting with happiness. The cry of "Dad" from Max's room wasn't just 2 words. It was a burst of emotion, full of tears and uncontrollable joy. David stepped into the room, and in front of him was Max, standing by the desk, holding the Charizard, face soaked with tears but wearing a smile so bright it lit up the whole small room. Dad, it's it. It's really it," Max shouted, jumping up and down, then running to hug his dad tightly. David hugged his son tight, feeling Max's tears soaking through his shirt. He stroked his son's hair and kissed the top of his head. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "and thank you." Max pulled his head back, his eyes still red but shining. "Thank you for what?" "For giving me a chance to fix my mistake," David said, his voice choked up. "For being patient, for still loving me." Max didn't answer, just hugged him tighter. Then Sarah appeared in the doorway. She stood there, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks, but with the happiest smile on her lips. She didn't say anything, just looked at father and son hugging as if it was the most beautiful sight she'd ever seen. Then Max let go and ran back to the desk, pointing at the other cards in the box. "Dad, this Blastoise! I've been looking for it. And this Mewtwo? How did you get all of these?" David sat down next to his son and told him the whole story about Leo, the 16-year-old with the big heart, Leo's grandpa, and the promise he asked for. Max sat quietly listening, his eyes wide with admiration. "He's really awesome," Max whispered when David finished. "Yeah," David nodded. "And he taught me a valuable lesson that these toys, their real value, isn't in their price. It's in the stories and memories they hold." Dinner that night was the happiest since David lost his job. Laughter filled the small apartment again. Not forced laughter, but natural, warm laughter. Max couldn't stop talking about the cards, about his new collecting plans. Sarah talked about a new student in her online class, a Japanese boy who really liked Pokémon. David sat there listening, laughing, feeling a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in so long. After dinner, while Sarah cleaned up, David brought out the new booster packs. "Want to open these together?" he suggested, his voice full of excitement. "To start your collection again?" "No, our collection." Max nodded, eyes shining. They didn't sit at the table. They sat right on the living room floor, spreading out a thin blanket. The sound of ripping packs filled the air, a familiar sound David hadn't heard in ages. Then Max's cheers when he pulled a new holographic Pikachu. David opened his pack and got a rare Venusaur. "Look at this one," David said, sounding as excited as a kid. Max looked over, eyes wide. "Whoa, Dad, you got a rare one." They sat there for hours, opening each pack, arranging them in the new album. David wasn't the tired, distant father anymore. He laughed loudly, argued with his son about which Pokémon was stronger, about game strategies. He told Max stories from his college days, about hunting for cards, about his old collecting friends. In that simple moment, David realized something. This joy, this connection, was more precious than his old director's chair, than the big house in the suburbs, than the expensive Lexus. And from then on, true to his promise to Leo, Friday nights became Pokémon night for father and son. Sometimes they played the card game, sometimes they just watched an old Pokémon episode. Sometimes Max taught his dad how to draw Pokémon, and David, with his terrible drawing skills, made funny pictures that had them both laughing hysterically. A few months passed. Winter gave way to spring. The trees outside the apartment began to bud. David, with his family's support and encouragement, found a new job, a part-time marketing position for a small company in the next town over. The pay wasn't as high as his old job, but enough for them to live comfortably in the small apartment. More importantly, the job gave him flexible hours so he could pick Max up from school, go to parent-teacher meetings, and have those full Friday nights with his son. He and Sarah made a clear financial plan together. They didn't hide things from each other anymore. Every Sunday night, they sat down, reviewed the week's spending, and planned for the next. They saved together for a small summer trip, maybe just a day at the nearby beach. But for them, it was a goal, a shared dream. Another Friday night. David got home earlier than usual. When he walked into the apartment, the delicious smell of food from the kitchen hit him. Sarah was cooking lasagna, Max's favorite. In the living room, Max was setting up the card game on the blanket, with the now much thicker collection album and some hand-drawn laminated cards around him. "Dad's home," Max cheered when he saw him. David took off his jacket, hung it up, and sat down next to his son. "What do you want to play today?" Max didn't answer right away. He looked at his dad, a mysterious glint in his eye. "I have this for you," he said, pulling an envelope from under the sofa cushion. David took it and opened it. Inside wasn't a store-bought Pokémon card. It was a hand-drawn card, colored carefully with colored pencils and neatly laminated. On it was a picture of a dad. David could recognize his own face, though it was cartoonish. And a son, Max, riding together on the back of a giant Charizard. They were flying over a small house, their apartment, with green trees and flowers below. The sky was full of stars. And below the drawing, in Max's most careful handwriting, it said, "Now, Dad, you're my strongest Pokémon." David held the card, his hand shaking slightly. He looked at it, then up at Max. The boy was looking at his dad with eyes full of love and pride. You drew this?" David asked, his voice hoarse. Max nodded. "I learned from tutorial videos online. And I asked Leo for advice over email, too. He said this drawing means a lot." David couldn't say anything more. He hugged his son, the card still in his hand. Looking over Max's shoulder, he saw Sarah standing in the kitchen doorway, smiling at them, still holding a ladle. He looked around the small living room, the old dining table, the worn sofa, the small TV, the faded beige walls. But in that space, there was his son's laughter, his wife's smile, the warm smell of food from the kitchen, and there was love, the most precious thing money can't buy. In that moment, David understood more clearly than ever. Getting by doesn't mean clinging to material things at all costs, living in fear and lies. It means, no matter the situation, holding on to each other, trusting and loving. It means having the courage to admit mistakes and the courage to start over. A real home isn't four walls of brick and mortar, a fancy address, or expensive furniture. It's where there is laughter, where promises are kept, where simple, warm moments together happen. And sometimes to find the most precious thing, you have to lose it once. Like David, he lost a Charizard card, he lost his job, he lost the big house. But from those losses, he found again a whole world of love he thought he'd dropped. A united family, an understanding son, a strong wife, and even a new 16-year-old friend with a heart of gold. He held up the hand-drawn card and looked at the words, "Dad, you're my strongest Pokémon." And he knew, no matter what life brought, whether they were in this small apartment or anywhere else, this was their real home, built on love, promises, and precious moments together. "I love you, Dad," Max whispered in his dad's arms. David kissed the top of his head. "I love you too, and I promise I'll always be your strongest Pokémon." Outside, the sunset was painting the western sky pink. In the small apartment, 3 people held each other, looking forward. Not with fear or worry, but with hope, with love, and with the belief that no matter what, they would always have each other. And that is the most precious thing of all.